young college student crashes her car on a snowy New Hampshire road and vanishes within minutes. No footprints, no phone calls, no goodbye. This is the mystery of Maura Murray. The night was February 9th, 2004, an ordinary Monday for most, but one that would forever change the small town of Haverhill, New Hampshire. Snow drifted down across the winding Route 112, a lonely stretch of road cutting through the mountains. It was the kind of night when the cold air seemed heavier, the silence deeper. For drivers, the road was treacherous, lined with trees and sharp turns that disappeared into darkness. Around 7:30 p.m., a Saturn sedan slid off the icy pavement, coming to rest against a snowbank near a curve. Its front end was damaged, the airbags deployed, and a faint trail of footprints in the snow hinted at someone stepping out into the night. A passing bus driver slowed, noticing the car, and a local neighbour peered through her window. She would later recall seeing a young woman standing by the vehicle. When offered help, the woman declined, insisting, "I've already called AAA." But the truth was, no such call had ever been made. By the time police arrived minutes later, the Saturn sat abandoned. The driver, 21-year-old nursing student Maura Murray, was gone. No one saw her walk away. No one reported picking her up. The snow was falling harder now, threatening to bury any trace of which direction she had taken. What unfolded that evening has haunted investigators and captured the imagination of millions for nearly 2 decades. How could someone vanish so quickly, so completely, after a minor car accident on a public road? Why were her belongings, maps, schoolwork, even alcohol, left scattered inside the car, while she herself disappeared into the night? The scene was eerily still. A running engine silenced, a pair of airbags deflated. Headlights dimmed under the falling snow. And yet, the one person who should have been there was nowhere to be found. In a matter of minutes, Maura Murray had slipped into the shadows of Route 112, leaving behind only questions that continue to echo in the cold New Hampshire air. To understand the mystery, you have to first understand the young woman at its centre. Maura Murray was just 21 years old, a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. On the surface, she had everything going for her: bright, athletic, and ambitious. Friends described her as soft-spoken, but determined. Someone who pushed herself in both academics and athletics. She had once run track, excelled in her classes, and dreamed of becoming a nurse. Her family was close-knit, and like many young women her age, Maura balanced school, relationships, and the constant pressure of planning a future. Her father, Fred, was proud of her, often speaking about how driven she was. She had a long-term boyfriend, Billy, an army officer stationed far away, and though the distance put a strain on their relationship, she often spoke with him and even made plans for a future together. But beneath the surface, there were struggles. Maura had transferred colleges, changed majors, and faced personal setbacks along the way. Just days before her disappearance, she had been caught using a stolen credit card to order food, an incident that embarrassed her but hadn't derailed her life. Her father later said she was under stress, trying to juggle schoolwork, money, and the expectations placed on her. Still, those who knew Maura never believed she was the type to simply vanish. She had too many ties, too many responsibilities, too much life ahead. Yet, in the days leading up to February 9th, small decisions hinted at something deeper. On her computer, she searched for directions to remote areas in Vermont and looked at rental properties in New Hampshire. To her professors, she emailed saying she'd be gone for a few days due to a family emergency. There was no such emergency. The portrait that emerges is of a young woman caught between stability and uncertainty. She was loved, intelligent, and full of potential, but also weighed down by private worries. It's this duality, the picture-perfect student with a hidden side, that makes her disappearance so haunting. Who was Maura Murray in those final days before she drove north? A stressed college student seeking escape? or someone preparing for a deliberate, permanent departure? Those questions continue to cast a shadow over every theory that followed. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Maura's life began to show small but troubling cracks, pieces of a puzzle that would later haunt investigators and her family alike. On the Thursday before she vanished, Maura broke down while working her campus security job at UMass. A phone call left her in tears, so shaken that her supervisor had to escort her back to her dorm. To this day, no one knows exactly what triggered her reaction, though some believe it was a call with her boyfriend Billy. That weekend, she visited her father Fred in Massachusetts. He had come to town to help her shop for a new car. On Saturday night, she borrowed his Toyota and attended a dorm party. But later that evening, she crashed the car on her way back, causing several $1,000s in damage. Though her father assured her everything could be fixed, it added another layer of stress to her already fragile state of mind. On Monday, February 9th, the day she disappeared, Maura began making quiet preparations. She emailed her professors, telling them she would be out of class for a week due to a family emergency. But her family confirmed there was no emergency at all. Instead, she spent time searching online for directions to remote areas in Vermont and browsing vacation rentals in New Hampshire. She even printed out maps of the White Mountains. That afternoon, Maura withdrew $280 in cash from an ATM. Surveillance footage shows her bundled in winter clothes, expression unreadable. She then went to a local liquor store, purchasing wine and other alcohol. All of these items were later found in her car. Perhaps the most chilling detail is how deliberate it all seemed. She packed some belongings from her dorm, carefully removing her name from voicemail and emails as if she intended to vanish for a while. And yet, she left behind many essentials. Her makeup, textbooks, even personal effects most wouldn't abandon if planning a permanent escape. By the time she drove north that evening, it was clear Maura had set something in motion. Whether it was a short getaway to clear her mind or the beginning of something far more permanent remains the heart of the mystery. By early evening on February 9th, Maura Murray was on the road. She drove her black 1996 Saturn sedan north, leaving the familiar streets of Amherst behind. No one knows exactly where she was headed. Her computer searches suggested Vermont, but her path carried her deep into the mountains of New Hampshire. The February night was cold, the roads slick with snow and ice, the kind of drive that demanded focus and caution. Around 7:27 p.m., Maura's car veered off Route 112, a narrow and twisting stretch known as Wild Ammonoosuc Road. The vehicle struck a tree or snowbank, its front end crumpling from the impact. The airbags deployed, leaving behind a powdery residue. Inside the car, police later found a box of wine. Some of it spilled across the interior, along with maps and personal belongings scattered across the seats. A neighbor living nearby heard the crash and looked out her window. She saw a young woman standing by the vehicle, appearing shaken but not injured. When the neighbor offered help and suggested calling the police, Maura politely declined, insisting she had already phoned 888 for roadside assistance. But phone records would later prove no such call was ever made. A passing bus driver also stopped, offering to assist. Maura once again refused, repeating her story. Within 10 minutes, both Good Samaritans had left her standing by the disabled Saturn, and that was the last confirmed sighting of Maura Murray. When police arrived shortly after 7:45 p.m., the scene was strangely empty. The Saturn remained where it had crashed, hazard lights off, engine silent. But Maura was nowhere to be found. Her footprints trailed a short distance into the snow, then abruptly vanished. There were no signs of a struggle, no dropped possessions, no cell phone. What made the scene more unsettling was the timing. Only a small window, less than 15 minutes, separated the last sighting of Maura from the arrival of law enforcement. In that brief span, she disappeared. Whether she walked into the woods, accepted a ride from a stranger, or something else entirely, no one knows. The road that night was quiet, lined with trees that swallowed sound and light. A car crash should have been the start of a rescue. Instead, it became the opening chapter of a mystery that still grips the country 2 decades later. When police reached Route 112 that February night, they expected to find a stranded driver waiting anxiously for help. Instead, they found silence. The black Saturn sat skewed against the snowbank, its front crumpled, airbags deflated. Inside were scattered belongings, maps of the White Mountains, a box of Franzia wine, empty beer bottles, and class notes. What was missing was far more telling: the young woman who had been seen just minutes earlier. Officers searched the immediate area with flashlights, sweeping the tree line along the dark road. Snow had begun to fall more heavily, covering what few footprints may have been left behind. One scent trail was briefly picked up by a tracking dog, but it ended abruptly in the middle of the road, as if Maura had stepped into a vehicle. Her cell phone and credit cards showed no further activity after that night. The car itself offered little evidence of where she might have gone. The driver's seat was adjusted for someone of her height. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no blood, no clear indication of injury. And yet, Maura had vanished in less than a quarter of an hour. In the hours that followed, police treated the case as a missing person incident, not a crime scene. The assumption was that Maura had left the area voluntarily, perhaps embarrassed by the accident, perhaps walking to find help. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen a young woman in the snow. Some had glimpsed her moments before the crash, but no one saw where she went. By the next morning, concern had grown. A formal search was launched, with teams combing the surrounding woods, fields, and rivers. Helicopters flew overhead, infrared cameras scanning for heat signatures. Nothing surfaced. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a single item that might point to where she had gone. It was as if Route 112 had swallowed her whole. For investigators, the lack of evidence was both baffling and frustrating. How could someone disappear so completely, so quickly, with searchers arriving almost immediately after she was last seen? From the very first hours, the Maura Murray case slipped into a space between accident and crime, leaving police with far more questions than answers. News of the abandoned car travelled quickly. Within hours, Maura's father, Fred Murray, was notified. For a parent, the idea that your child has vanished into the cold night air is more than fear. It is paralysis, a kind of disbelief that takes the breath away. Fred rushed to New Hampshire, desperate for answers. But what he encountered was silence, snow, and a car that offered no explanation. Fred had always been close to his daughter. He was the one she leaned on when her car broke down. The one who tried to help her buy a safer vehicle just days before she disappeared. Now, standing beside the Saturn on Route 112, he was consumed with guilt. If only he'd been there that night. If only he had done more. Maybe Maura would still be safe. Those thoughts would haunt him for years. Her siblings, too, were stunned. Kathleen and Julie, her sisters, could not understand why Maura would leave or where she might have gone. Phone calls between them turned frantic, switching between hope and despair. Was she hiding out? Had someone taken her? Or had the cold night claimed her life before anyone could help? The family pressed authorities for swift action, but tensions rose quickly. Fred believed the initial response had been too casual, that precious hours had been wasted treating the situation as a simple missing person incident instead of a potential crime. To him, every delay was a failure, every unanswered question an accusation. Volunteers and relatives joined the search, trudging through snow-covered woods, calling out her name, scanning every ditch and stream. Each hour without results deepened the sense of helplessness. How could a 21-year-old woman simply evaporate within minutes? As days passed, the Murray family clung to each new lead, no matter how small. Every reported sighting, every rumor was followed, but nothing brought Maura home. The house that once rang with laughter and ordinary life now echoed with grief and unanswered prayers. For Fred, the absence was unbearable. He once told reporters that not knowing was worse than death, that living in uncertainty was its own kind of torture. From that moment forward, the Murray family's life became inseparable from the search for Maura. It was no longer just a case file or a headline. It was their daughter, their sister, their blood, missing in the woods of New Hampshire, leaving behind a silence that only grew louder with each passing day. As days turned into weeks, the story of Maura Murray began to spread beyond the borders of Haverhill. Local newspapers first carried the headlines, UMass student missing after crash on Route 112. Soon, television stations picked up the story, showing her smiling college photos alongside the haunting image of her abandoned Saturn. To many, the case seemed too strange, too sudden. How could a young woman vanish so quickly after a minor car accident? National networks joined in. CNN, ABC, and Dateline covered the disappearance, framing it as one of the most baffling mysteries in recent memory. Reporters flocked to the White Mountains, filming segments along the snowy road where her car had been found. Viewers at home stared at the screen, captivated by the eerie emptiness of the scene. But what truly set Maura's case apart was its timing. 2004 was the dawn of the internet sleuth era. Online forums, chat rooms, and early blogs became rallying points for strangers determined to solve the mystery themselves. Web Sleuths, a crime discussion forum, hosted hundreds of threads dissecting every known detail. Amateur investigators traced her phone records, her ATM withdrawal, even speculated on her emotional state in the days before the crash. Some theories bordered on the far-fetched, but others uncovered inconsistencies that kept the conversation alive. Was Maura running from something in her personal life? Did she stage her disappearance? Or was she the victim of foul play, picked up by a stranger on that lonely road? For the Murray family, the media attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it kept Maura's name in the public eye, ensuring she was never forgotten. On the other, it exposed them to constant scrutiny, judgment, and speculation. Every action, every statement, was analysed and debated by people who had never met Maura, but felt entitled to an opinion. In time, her disappearance became known as one of the first true crime cases of the internet age. Long before podcasts and YouTube channels dominated the genre, strangers on message boards were already piecing together maps, timelines, and theories late into the night. Maura Murray was no longer just a missing person. She had become a mystery that the entire world felt invited to solve. As the investigation stalled and years passed without answers, theories about Maura Murray's disappearance multiplied. Each detail of her final days became fuel for speculation, and soon several dominant theories emerged, each one painting a different portrait of what might have happened on Route 112. The first was the escape theory, that Maura deliberately walked away from her life. Supporters of this idea point to her internet searches for condos in Vermont and cabins in New Hampshire, her emails to professors about a fabricated family emergency, and the money she withdrew before leaving campus. Perhaps she needed to breathe, to step away from mounting pressures, and the crash was simply a setback on her way to start over somewhere else. But if that was the case, why has no one heard from her in 20 years? No bank accounts, no social security activity, no phone calls. Could a 21-year-old vanish voluntarily and stay hidden for this long? The second was abduction. To many, the idea that Maura left willingly in the middle of a freezing night, without proper clothing, was unthinkable. The footprints ending abruptly on the road suggested she may have entered another vehicle. Was it a stranger who picked her up in a moment of vulnerability? Or someone she knew, who happened to be nearby? This theory carries dark implications, that Maura met with foul play only minutes after her accident. A third theory centered on the possibility of an accidental death in the wilderness. Perhaps disoriented, embarrassed, or under the influence of alcohol, Maura could have walked into the woods and succumbed to the cold. Search teams, however, combed the area extensively without finding a trace. Could the White Mountains still hold her remains, hidden under snow, soil, and time. Then came the more controversial suggestions that someone in her circle might know more than they've revealed. Some online sleuths scrutinized her boyfriend, her friends, even her family, though no evidence has ever substantiated those suspicions. Each theory raised as many questions as it answered. Why leave her belongings behind? Why decline help from bystanders? Why lie about calling AAA? Every possibility seemed plausible on its own, yet none could explain all the details. In the end, the theories reflected not just the facts, but the human need to make sense of the senseless. To this day, investigators, family, and strangers around the world remain divided over which explanation holds the truth. In the years after Maura vanished, investigators and volunteers chased every lead that surfaced, hoping one of them might finally break the silence left behind on Route 112. The early searches were exhaustive. Teams scoured the woods, rivers, and abandoned cabins in the surrounding area. Helicopters with infrared cameras hovered overhead. Cadaver dogs swept through miles of terrain. Yet nothing conclusive was ever found. No clothing, no bones, no sign of struggle. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Rumors would flare up, only to burn out. Witnesses occasionally claimed to have seen someone resembling Maura in nearby states or even as far away as Canada. Each sighting sparked hope, but none were ever verified. In 2006, 2 years after her disappearance, the New Hampshire State Police took over the case, treating it as a potential criminal investigation. The move suggested that foul play could no longer be ruled out. Over time, dozens of search warrants were issued, and various properties near the crash site were combed for evidence. One of the most notable developments came in 2019, when investigators dug up part of a home's basement, not far from where Maura's car had been found. For years, online sleuths had speculated that this house held secrets. Strange cadaver dog reactions and local rumors fueled the suspicion. But after days of careful excavation, nothing tied to Maura was uncovered. The disappointment was crushing, both for her family and for the thousands who had followed the case online. On the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, in 2024, the Attorney General's office released an age progression photo, an artist's rendering of what Maura might look like at 41. The image was meant to stir fresh leads, to remind the public that she could still be alive. For her family, the picture was bittersweet, a glimpse of the woman Maura might have become, and a reminder of the years stolen away. Despite countless searches, tips and theories, the trail remains cold. Every lead ends the same way: empty fields, dead-end basements, or fading rumors. Yet, the persistence of investigators and volunteers shows just how deeply this mystery resonates. After 2 decades, the search for Maura Murray is still very much alive, even if the answers remain elusive. For the Murray family, time has been both an enemy and a test of endurance. In the immediate aftermath of Maura's disappearance, her father Fred became the most relentless advocate for answers. He stood on the roadside where her Saturn was found, handing out flyers, speaking to reporters, demanding that police treat the case as more than just a missing person. His voice was steady, but behind it lay heartbreak and a sense of personal responsibility he could never shake. "If I had been there," he often said, "this never would have happened." As years passed, Fred's fight grew heavier. He joined search after search, trudging through woods and rivers in the biting New England cold. He knocked on doors, spoke to strangers, and never stopped pressuring investigators. Even as leads turned into dead ends, he refused to let Maura's name fade from public memory. For Fred, the worst fate was not death, it was being forgotten. Her siblings carried the weight too. Julie, her older sister, became a steady voice for the family, speaking at events and participating in documentaries that kept Maura's case alive in the public eye. Kathleen, another sister, struggled with the emotional toll, her grief often complicated by her own personal battles. Each sibling processed the loss differently, but all of them remained united by the absence of Maura. In 2021, tragedy struck again when Fred passed away without ever knowing what happened to his daughter. His death marked a painful turning point. Those who knew him said he never stopped searching, never stopped believing an answer was out there. His passing left the family with both sorrow and determination to carry on the mission he had devoted his life to. Even today, the Murray family continues to push. They maintain websites, speak with journalists, and work with law enforcement to keep the case active. On every anniversary of Maura's disappearance, they gather on Route 112, holding candles against the winter night, reminding the world that she is still missing. For the Murrays, 2 decades have not dulled the pain. The questions remain as sharp as they were on the first night. Somewhere out there lies the truth of what happened to Maura. Until it is found, the family's story is not one of closure, but of endless waiting. As the years stretched on without answers, the case of Maura Murray took on a life of its own, far beyond the boundaries of New Hampshire. What began as a local missing person story slowly transformed into a cultural touchstone, a mystery that symbolized both the power and the pitfalls of the digital age. By the late 2000s, online forums like Web Sleuths had dedicated entire sections to the Murray case. Armchair detectives from across the world pieced together timelines, mapped out her final drive, and scrutinized every photograph of the crash site. Some participants brought genuine expertise, former law enforcement, search and rescue volunteers, even forensic specialists. Others brought speculation, weaving theories from fragments of rumor. In this swirl of information, Maura's disappearance became one of the most discussed cold cases on the internet. Then came podcasts and documentaries, shows like Disappeared on Investigation Discovery and Oxygens. The disappearance of Maura Murray brought her story to national audiences. The true crime podcast boom of the 2010s turned her name into a familiar one for millions of listeners. Each episode reignited debate, fueling fresh waves of theories. Was she escaping her life? Was she abducted? Was there a secret no one had uncovered? But this cultural attention came with a cost. For Maura's family, the internet spotlight was both a blessing and a burden. While it ensured her story would never fade, it also exposed them to relentless scrutiny. Strangers analyzed their interviews, speculated about their motives, and dissected every inconsistency in their words. At times, the family felt less like victims of tragedy and more like subjects on trial. Still, the cultural imprint was undeniable. Maura Murray became known as the first internet sleuth case, a symbol of how online communities could both aid and complicate investigations. Her name appears in college courses on media ethics, in books about missing persons, and in countless YouTube channels dedicated to true crime. In many ways, Maura's disappearance transcended the boundaries of her own story. It forced a generation to confront unsettling questions. How do we investigate tragedy in the age of digital crowdsourcing? And when millions of people share a mystery, do we get closer to the truth or further from it? 2 decades have passed since the night Maura Murray vanished, and yet the questions remain as haunting as ever. A car wreck on a snowy road should have been the start of a rescue. Instead, it became the beginning of a mystery that refuses to be solved. Did Maura plan her disappearance, slipping into a new life beyond the reach of family and law enforcement? If so, how has she stayed hidden for 20 years in a world where every transaction, every movement leaves a trace? Or was she a victim of circumstance, abducted in those precious minutes before police arrived, caught in a moment of vulnerability that sealed her fate? Some still cling to the belief that she wandered into the woods and succumbed to the elements, her remains hidden beneath layers of time and nature. But after exhaustive searches, not a single piece of evidence supports that conclusion. Every theory offers pieces of truth, but none fit the puzzle entirely. That's what makes the case of Maura Murray endure. It isn't just about one young woman. It's about the unsettling possibility that someone could vanish into thin air in the modern age, leaving behind no answers, only echoes. For her family, the pain is unrelenting. For investigators, the frustration is profound. And for the millions who have followed this case, the mystery lingers like a shadow across Route 112, where the snow still falls each winter, covering the spot where her Saturn once stood. Perhaps one day a new lead will surface, or a witness will come forward with the missing piece of the puzzle. Until then, Maura's story is suspended between hope and despair, her fate unknown, her voice silent. And that silence is where you, the listener, come in. What do you believe happened to Maura Murray? Could she still be alive, living quietly under a different name? Was she taken that night by a stranger? Or is the truth something no one has yet imagined? Share your thoughts, your theories, and keep her story alive. Because the greatest danger in any cold case is not the darkness of mystery, it's being forgotten. And Maura Murray must never be forgotten.